Oh, shucks, guys, thanks. So yeah, this talk, coming right after Seth's talk, is excellent because we cover a lot of the same topics. And where he kind of ends rolls well into where this talk begins because it's all about iteration. And iteration isn't a concept that's going to be new to anybody in this room. It's generally expressed as a cycle of creation, testing, learning, and then creating again and going through it, through it, and through it. And there's a reason you're going to hear about iteration when you talk to almost any game developer about their process, because it's so pervasive and it's proven, it works. There are many studies outside of game development, like this one from Jacob Nielsen in 1993, that show if you poll users on their experience and you listen to that and then you iterate again, you're going to get very steep returns in the early stages of working on anything. So of course we want to do it. But like anything else that has broad acceptance, it also has many different meanings, contexts, applications, interpretations. We could be talking about game franchises, which iterate year over year, adding new features, removing other things. A game like Spelunky, which initially would come out in a Game Maker version, and then would be iterated upon in the code and the art, but generally the same design framework, into another whole game. Individual elements of a game, like this is a Team Fortress Spy in various iterations, from the original Quake mod all the way up to the version that we know him as today. And like many things that go through extenuous iteration, you're going to see vast differences between the final product and any iteration along the way, but you'll also see elements which are familiar, which stuck around and stood the test of time. And it's not just visual either. Post-release, Valve has done a lot of stuff with TF2, and they don't just add visual accoutrements to the characters, but they also iterate on the design through new features, gameplay modes, items, and these let the game just continue to change and evolve and react. Gunpoint by Tom Francis is a very publicly observable case of iteration. You can go back and play versions of that game early on. So you can see versions where he was just figuring out how does the gameplay mechanic work, how does the character move. Later iterations, we're starting to figure out the environment, how the player moves around and interacts with other characters. And when you play these early iterations, as you can with Gunpoint, you then play the final version and you can see the effect. You can see the things that stuck around and the things that maybe were filtered away and cut out over time. And this is iteration in action. And when we're talking about level design specifically, we tend to think of iteration as those steps that have to happen in order for the level to exist. So we have to know what the plan is, and then we put the plan into action and we build it and we polish it into something final. And we can think of this as structural iteration. These things have to happen or else the level can't be there. You can't have a level without all of this stuff. But if you're looking at this, it's a gross simplification, but it's still missing one core critical step, which is actually testing what you've done. And this play testing step is where we learn. This is where we get into iteration as we often think about it, where we cycle back. We test and then we build again, and we test and then we build again. This is qualitative iteration. This isn't required to make the level exist. This is required to make the level good. We don't usually get it right on the first try. And so we don't know how many times we're going to have to cycle through this. This is where you get the it's done when it's done mentality in games. Because we're effectively guessing, right? We're just trying things out and seeing what happens, seeing what works. But we have to go through that process to make sure we get something that's good. And that's really what this talk is about. This is a talk about process. And I don't mean the individual process by which we build a particular level, but the process that we as a studio use to build the many, many levels across our entire game. And I think process is worth some discussion because process is what enables us to make games at all. But not just that, the way we make games, the process we choose enables us to make the games in a way we would like to make them, a way that is healthy, sane, productive, that we can get better at doing. And iteration really is just one of many choices in how you conduct yourself and what process you choose. And process itself, interestingly, is something that we tend to iterate upon. Consider any task that you have done many times in your life, whether it's building a level or making your favorite meal or getting from home to work. You don't do it drastically different now than you may have done at the beginning, but you have organically learned and gotten better at it and changed the way you do that task. This is true of us as a studio. The process I'm going to talk about today was really born for Fallout 3, but we didn't throw that out when we got to Skyrim. We kept it around and we tweaked it, we changed it, we observed the things that worked and did not work, and we've kept it around for our current project and the ones beyond that, because we certainly don't have all the answers, we don't have it all right, but we're going to be on our way getting better every time. So as I mentioned, this begins with Fallout 3. And the reason it begins with Fallout 3 and not earlier in the studio's history is because Fallout 3 was actually the first Bethesda Game Studios title that had a level design team. Now, it's not as though Oblivion and Morrowind didn't have level design content. They had tons of great levels in them. We just hadn't ever had a core group of people dedicated to just this aspect of the game. So we were fleshing our idea of what level design was out in the context of a broader team. We had existing tools. We had existing workflow and pipeline to just mesh in with. And we knew when we were approaching this that iteration was going to be the path to success, the path to quality. This was going to be what we needed to embrace. So, a brief word about this talk, and really any talk I think at GDC. This is not prescriptive. This is not the way to do a thing that you can just lift and apply to your own studio. This is just anthropology. This is a historical lesson of how we've done it. And so the parameters of our situation, our specific set of circumstances, would be a good place to start if you want to figure out how to apply our lessons to your own workflow, because you're going to find things that you can compare and contrast to you. So if we're talking about how to make all the levels for Bethesda, we know we have to make a lot of them, right? That's no secret. It's a core feature of our games, that there's just a ton of crap in there. Like, there are over 200 locations, from small campfires to roadside encounters to the big dungeons that you're in for a couple of hours. So whatever process we choose, it has to empower us to output just tons of stuff. We also want to increase the moment-to-moment quality of the experience. Now, we're always going to want to do this. When it comes to quality, satisfaction is not something you want. You want to always strive to be better. We also knew that Bethesda is a process-oriented studio, and at any given time, we can kind of poke our heads up above and say, where are we right now? Where are we going? And how long do we have to get there? And I think it's easy to kind of vilify producers and schedules and these things. You know, they bog us down, man, and we got to be creative. But I would agree with you talking about bad scheduling. But the absence of any scheduling is, for me, like being adrift at sea, right? You're in deep blue ocean, and you could swim all day, and you might arrive somewhere wonderful, but the chances are you're going to be further from land than when you began. But when you have some dates, when you have some structure, it gives you a way to orient yourself, to know where am I going and about how much time and energy will it take to get there, and how am I going to spend that time getting there the best way I can. Now, as I mentioned, Bethesda was an established studio when level design came onto the scene. This means that we knew how code worked. We know what the pipelines work. We know how art gets in the game. We have a tool set. We didn't have to deal with a lot of the other stuff you would have to deal with in, say, a startup situation where everybody's figuring everything out. We had a strong, supportive studio that we just had to figure out how to slot in. We could be very focused on just how can we work and how can we identify ourselves. Something else about Bethesda is it's a low turnover studio. This means that we're going to have the same number of level designers at the beginning of a project as we do at the end. Now, with content creation roles, level design being one of those, you'll see a lot of times where a studio doesn't really know how to use those people well at the beginning of a project, and so they just won't have many. And then at the end of the project, you need tons of those people because you need all the content, and so you sort of balloon up. But then at the end of the project, this is how people end up getting shuffled off to other projects or studios or laid off. This is not something that we do, so we wanted to make sure that we could find ways to make sure these people were productive at the beginning and being used well, but also so we didn't get in a situation where we were understaffed at the end of the project. Also, important to us was quality of life. So, I hate crunch. That's not a particularly controversial thing to say. I'm not going out on a big limb here, I don't think. I'd love to hear the person who wants to defend crunch. Is he here? Is he here? But the thing is, when we talk about crunch collectively, I think we tend to talk about exploitation, the kind of crunch that we hear about and many of us have lived through where it's expected of you. It's built into the schedule as an expectation. You're going to crunch. There's no other way. But just as prevalent, I think, and more insidious is the way that we put ourselves in that situation. We will paint ourselves into a corner where we have to crunch because we didn't plan well. We didn't really think. So that absence of scheduling can put us in a situation where we had the best intentions, but we end up crunching and killing ourselves just as badly because we left ourselves no other choice. By planning responsibly and thinking critically about process, we thought we could avoid the situation, and so far we have. So taking a couple steps back, let's imagine for a second that you are a brand new aspiring level designer. You've never made a level before, but you have a cool idea. So you're going to take that idea, go online, download an editor, and start making your awesome Half-Life 2 level, right? You're reading tutorials, you're kind of tweaking the tutorials to be about what you want your level to be about, you're figuring things out as you go, and then one day you finish and you've made a level. Congratulations. The thing about this sort of black box approach to really anything is you can make mistakes anywhere along the way. And those little mistakes and missteps, you might not realize, you're kind of feeling things out, you don't know what you're doing, and you either don't ever realize you made a mistake and you end up shipping kind of a crappy level, which is totally okay, that's part of the process, it's how we get better. Or you kind of meander backwards and organically sort of work the problem out, but it's kind of too late, the damage is done, it just takes you longer to make a crappy level. So you come to your second level, and now you understand the process a little bit more. Like, oh, okay, I have to gray box things out before I start doing a lot of visual detail, make sure my layout's good. I have to make sure the core pacing with the encounters works well before I start getting fancy with the scripting. And this compartmentalization, folks, this is how we can break work down into digestible chunks. So now if we're going to take, say, level A that we want to build, we might know that we need to work through planning, we need to do a layout, do some gameplay and markup, and then we're going to polish it up. So now you're working a little bit differently, where you can think critically about, I'm at this version of the level, and you can sort of analyze your work and make sure you're happy with it, and then move on into the second version, or the second iteration. Make sure that's cool, maybe get some feedback from people, go on to the third, go on to the fourth, until you polish it and you're done with something. From here, which is how a lot of us end up working, when we're just learning and modding, you can then extrapolate into making a whole game, where I will go through this process and make the first level, finish it, go on to the second level, finish it, go on to the third. If you think about this in terms of how we spend our time, let's imagine that each of those 4 passes takes about a week. So it's going to roughly take us a month to build each level. So January, we're all in on level A, we finish it, we go all in on level B, finish it, level C, and then we're done with our little 3-level game. But this isn't how we do it at Bethesda. So if that you could think of as sort of continuous iteration over the content, we do what I would call spaced out iteration. So we'll start from the same place. We break the work down into chunks that we can understand and communicate. And then we'll go ahead and we'll do that first piece of work, that first iteration of the first piece of content. But then we'll do that same iteration across every other level in the game. Only then do we go back to the first level, do the second iteration, go through second iteration, everything else in the game, so on and so forth. The core difference between this, and it's a big one, is time. Weeks will pass. You work on a level and you won't see it again for a while. And then you work on it again, and you work on it again. But you're also working on all this other stuff kind of synchronously. So looking at our schedule again, now we get these breaks where I'm working on level A, the blue level, and I don't see it again for 2 weeks. This changes how we think about things, because now January isn't level A month, right? Now we're in first pass on the game. Then we move on to our second pass of the whole game, third pass, and then at the end of our cycle here, we're polishing all the content in the game together. There are a number of benefits to this approach, a number of reasons why we embrace it. One, which is easy to overlook, is it's just more interesting. Any of us who have spent weeks working on something know that when it gets closer and closer to you, you lose the ability to have perspective. You can no longer be objective, and you can spin your wheels fiddling on some little nuancy thing without realizing you're not making the best decisions in the grand scheme of things. So taking a few weeks off from something and coming back gets us out of this. And just changing up and keeping us fresh and interested distracts us so that when we come back to this piece of content again, we're doing so with fresh eyes. It also allows us to very incrementally build on a strong foundation. Every pass depends on the pass that came before it to be good. Otherwise, the foundation fails. So this approach of spacing things out allows us to have more time to make sure we are in fact building upon strong foundation. And this ties very heavily to that aspect of time. Because if I finish a level's iteration on Friday and I say, hey, can you run through this and give me your feedback and let me know I want to start working on my next iteration on Monday, that's a very different situation than saying, I'm finishing this first pass and I'd like some feedback from you. I'm going to work on it in June. Now that person is able to play the content organically, actually give you well thought out notes, and then you can digest those notes and react to them later when you're already coming back to the space. This prevents feedback from becoming a bottleneck, which is actually a big problem. This also allows us to be very focused in what we're working on, what our efforts are per iteration. This goes back to that calendar view, where we don't necessarily want to think about the first pass of level A and then second and third and fourth and then go on to level B, because we might have learned things about doing first or second pass on level B, but it's too late for level A. Level A is done. We can't really go back to it, or else we're going to just can the schedule. Also, This allows us to deal with working on a game which isn't done, which is being made from, under our feet. And this is the linchpin. This is incredibly important. This is the foundation of every decision basically in this PowerPoint, right? Because let's accept for a moment that making games is kind of crazy. Lots of things are going on, and everything is connected to everything else. It doesn't matter if you're working on a team of 200 or 20 or just by yourself. We all know that if you touch one thing over here in a game, it affects 10 other things over here, and only one of them you kind of expected. So the timing and the context of what we choose to do and when matters a lot. This is absolutely paramount. It's, again, foundational to everything I'm talking about. So how this manifests for level designers is a dependency on code and art. Great code and great art don't guarantee great levels, but you can't make great levels without them. Not really. Not particularly the way that we build levels. But great code and great art take time. Unless you're building a +1 sequel, you're working from scratch. You don't have anything. So that's one of the questions that our process hopes to answer. How do you effectively apply yourself as a level designer in the early going? You have to look at this through the lens of what's available to the level designer. Because early in the dev cycle, there's nothing. There's no executable, and if there is, there's no art in it to work with. And also conceptually, we're in this blue sky phase, and everything is possible. Every idea is a good idea. And this is fun. This is one of the most enjoyable parts of working on games, but it's also very difficult to focus because none of those ideas have actually had to show their merit. And everybody has a little bit of different idea of what a particular concept is going to be. This contrasts directly, though, to late in the dev cycle, when now we have a lot of art and code to work with. And those ideas, which were cool ideas at the beginning, have now been through the crucible of implementation. Things have succeeded or failed on their own merit through observation. And now we know that these things are all cut, this thing is a core mechanic, and this thing we didn't expect to be good, but it really is. So in a nutshell, our job is really hard at the beginning. But at the end, it's when the best stuff happens. This is where we have the tools we need to make great levels. Now, it's worth a little tangent here to talk about what a level designer is at Bethesda because it is different from studio to studio. And as you might expect, a level designer at Bethesda can work with layout, working with modular kits, interiors and exteriors, understands how to tease out good gameplay from our systems, do all the logic, gameplay markups, scripting, and also make a technically competent level that's going to run at a good frame rate and not crash. But we wear a lot more hats than just these. Because level designers will also get involved with writing dialogue, writing books, working in systems, stuff like combat, balance, crafting, prototyping systems with our scripting language, collaborating with programmers on internal tools and processes. Basically, any odd job that comes up, it's very likely a level designer is the person we're going to throw at that job. And there are a couple of big reasons why I think this is a good approach for us. One of them, which isn't super relevant to the topic, is it actually helps grow that individual. So it's easy nowadays to become super specialized and only work on one thing, and I find that boring, just personally. I like learning and doing different things and changing gears all the time. So this can hopefully enrich the level designer personally, but also from a more pragmatic sort of studio point of view, it makes that person more broadly useful. So, for example, if we have a prototyping task that's going to require some scripting, we don't immediately go to the strongest scripter. We'll actually choose somebody who's a weak scripter who we think can sort of take one more step on their path and do this task and get broader at that. So the longer a level designer stays at the studio, the broader and broader and broader their skill set gets. Also, this allows us, from sort of more of a management scheduling point of view, to maximize the productivity of that level designer. And depending on, if you come from a certain school of thought, this might seem counterintuitive. Specialization is a great way to maximize productivity, right? But you have to think of it in the context of early versus late dev. So early in the cycle, there are a lot of unanswered questions. We don't know how the editor is going to work, and we need to rethink some things about how we make the editor work for this game. We need to prototype systems. We need to get a lot of data into the game, get things set up. And like I said, we throw level designers at those things. It means we can't spend as much time making levels, but that's okay. We don't have the tools to make good levels right now, so we'll spend a lot of time doing other stuff. But does this become a problem later? And the answer is no, not really, because later a lot of those problems are solved. As the stuff that we prototyped succeeded or failed and is moved into being coded solutions, the content stuff that we put in now just sort of needs to be balanced. It becomes a maintenance task. So we spend a lot less of our time doing all the ancillary stuff, but that's okay too, because now we have the tools to do level design, and we want to be freed up for that. This gets into what we call around the studio opportunity time. Now, we've already acknowledged, for level design specifically, the best stuff happens at the end. And this meshes well with the idea of opportunity time, which is basically that opportunity time is when we get something on screen. We have proven to ourselves that we're not good at guessing what's going to work. Our best ideas that we love tend to be the ones we cut the fastest. It's only by getting something on screen that we can all make sure we're on the same page. We don't have different ideas about what it's going to be. And we want to get there fast so that we can say, this is bad, cut it. Or this has potential, change it. Or, this is way better than we thought it was. And we want to double down on that. And so opportunity time is basically getting to the time where we can identify those opportunities that we want to really amp up. The enemy for level designers, however, is the content cram that tends to come at the end of a dev cycle. Because again, at the end, now we can make levels. Now we have everything we need. So we need as many level designers making as much stuff as possible. And oh my God, the schedule can only accommodate the content. But opportunity time is not about getting stuff in or done. It's about making it good. So that's the other big question we're trying to solve. How, through process, can we create opportunity time for ourselves at the end? So from here on out, I'm mostly going to be focused on the specific passes. And these are the actual procedures that we go through at Bethesda to schedule ourselves, to how we think about and talk about levels, and actually get all this stuff done. And you have to remember that this is all about laying a foundation. Every pass is designed to create a foundation for the passes that will come after it. They're all very focused. They have core objectives, which I'll talk about. And the timing and the context matter a lot. They have everything to do with our choices. So I'm not just going to tell you, at pass 2 we do X, Y, and Z. I'm also going to tell you at that pass the game is roughly in this state, because that influences what we can do most efficiently at any given time. So our first pass is actually called pass 0. Pass 0 is the pitch pass, planning. We're just concepting out what we want the level to be, because at this point we're really pretty much fully in pre-production still, and there's nothing to work with. We don't have an executable, we might not have an editor or anything to work with, so it's all on paper. But the one thing we have, which is a really useful tool, is a big old list. And this list has all of the content that level design plans to build in the whole game. It's effectively a slot machine. What encounter types, what architecture sets, where are they located, what scope are they? We mix and match all this stuff, and then we have a plan for how many levels and what size can we make in the amount of time we've given ourselves. So as a level designer, you might receive a pass 0 task like this. You're going to be working on Bleak Falls Barrow. It is a Draugr crypt built with a Nordic ruin set. It is near the town of Riverwood, and it is large, meaning you'll get a certain amount of time on the schedule. Now, some of these will have strings attached. It's part of a quest line, or we have certain particular ideas about this location, but the vast majority are not. So your objective as a level designer is to tell us what you would like to do. And you do this in the form of a one-sheet pitch. So we go on the wiki, we have some data about the space, and you pitch us what you would like to do. When we're doing this, we try and keep them really short. 1 paragraph is great. 2 or 3 is acceptable. More than that, I don't want to talk about it, right? Just keep it short and concise, because we really want to boil down to what is it that makes this particular level special. We found that if we try and do too much with one space, we can lose focus. We cannot be really sure what this level is about. So boiling it down to the one best thing forces you to make hard decisions early about what your theme is. And we also think about story at this stage, but I do not mean story which is player-facing. So this isn't necessarily going to manifest as dialogue or a book in the world. This is stuff like, who built this place? Why is it here? What happened here a long time ago? What's happened here recently? And that might flavor the context of when the player arrives. Even though this stuff doesn't get told to the player directly, it lends to a sense of internal consistency where we know this is an ancient crypt that was built and it fell into disuse, and later they would bring political heretics down here and leave them to rot. Okay, now that informs a lot of decisions about how I build this space. It gives you a foothold for environmental storytelling. And when we're not working on these spaces continuously, it also reminds us, what is the spirit of the space? What is its unique identity against the other 199 spaces the player might encounter in the game? Now, we also take time to generate an asset request list per level. I don't care about every floor and ceiling and chair. That stuff gets taken care of other ways. But anything that is either unique to your level or unprecedented, we want to hear about. Now, 2 reasons for this. One, obvious. We want to build an art schedule. How much unique art we need is part of that. But the less obvious and the far more important thing is when you're a level designer and you have to generate this request, it's not okay to say art request. Bell puzzle. Player rings bells to open passage. You need to break that down. How many bells? How big are they? Are they all the same size or different? Do they need an animation? Do they need a sound? Do you have the script hooks to even do this puzzle? What's useful about this, at these early stages, it's very easy to be abstract and just like think of cool things, and maybe these things are impractical that you can't actually pull off. Going through the process of determining, okay, what do I actually need to make it work, forces you to mentally implement the content. And when you do that, it grounds you and makes sure that you're doing something you can actually pull off, and avoids doing things like requesting art that somebody will spend a bunch of time making and then you realize you can't even use, which is terribly wasteful. So just as important as what we choose to do on a pass, I'm going to tell you what we don't do on a particular pass. Because I don't know about you all, but the level designers I know aren't the most restrained humans on the planet. We like getting our stuff on screen. We like seeing our ideas come to life. That's the drug that hooked us, right? That's why we're here. But it leads to a lot of wasted work. If you're excited about your space and you want to light it in Clutter and you don't really have the tools to do that, all that stuff's going to get deleted later. It's going to look silly if you try to, populate an entire dungeon with mop buckets and, brooms. So don't spend the time now. Resist the temptation and just focus on what's the most efficient thing you can be doing now. So we build this into our expectations of the spaces because it's easy to forget and we get excited. So for example, at pass 0, don't even boot the editor up. There's no point. We don't have anything to work with. Now, for those of you who've used the creation kit, we don't have gray boxing. We don't do gray boxing of any kind. We don't even have the tools. So there's nothing for us to do in the editor. Save yourself the headache. However, we also do not make detailed maps. So pulling out the graph paper and getting very specific about the proportions and the gaps and the enemy locations at this point can become frustrating later because those blueprint approaches don't translate well to working with kits. It's better for us to be loose and abstract now and then sketch with the kits later and work with them as opposed to work against them based on some idea we had months ago. This doesn't mean that we don't do maps, but they look more like this. They're very abstract. It's kind of almost like the bubble charts that Seth was talking about. It's just beats and pacing and a general idea of connectivity and how these things might work together. But that's it. This page in my notebook is for me. This is not a communication tool for anybody else on the team. It just helps me organize my thoughts, and that's okay. Likewise, we don't like fluffy documentation. I have seen 20-page level design documents for 30 minutes of content. I think that's a bad ratio. And I've seen documents like that which will mention in passing, the enemies show up on hovercraft, and then include 3 pages about the different models of hovercraft, the fuel they use, the lubricants, where that's manufactured, and the political intrigue between the 2 brothers who run the plant, and one is vying for power after the death of their father. Cool. That's fun backstory, but it doesn't actually tell me anything about your plan for making this good content that the player experiences. So stay away from it. Now, some people think through documentation and express themselves through documentation, and that's 100% fine, but don't show me. Boil it down. Get it down to the nugget, the core of what it is. That's part of the job we're doing here, so that we can communicate what it is, so that later on we have this guiding light for what this level is. Okay. So then we go on to another pass 0, and one after that, and one after that. And this takes time. As time passes, the game is changing, evolving, new things are going in. Eventually, we get to pass 1. Pass 1's about layout. Now, we're still kind of one toe in pre-production. There's not a whole lot for us to work with, but one thing that we do have are kits. Now, anybody who saw the talk that I gave with Nate last year, we place a really, really heavy emphasis on day 1, level designers are collaborating with the kit artists to make sure these kits are functional and aren't going to change out from under us. Because otherwise, our whole process, everything from here on out, wouldn't work. It's absolutely vital we have kits that we can use and have faith in early. It enables us to do this. So at first pass, as you might expect, do a layout. You can trust the pieces. They'll be there the whole time. This is as close as we get to gray boxing because the spaces are going to be unlit, they're going to be uncluttered, the art's unfinished, but we can still establish a sense of pacing, rhythm, flow. What, in your mind's eye, might this level finally be, and are the spaces working? We also take a little extra time now to really bang on the kits. We want to make sure that we've thought of all the best ideas. We're not going to have some piece of this kit come online when we're on 3rd pass because it's very difficult to retroactively implement that stuff. So we'll spend a little extra time communicating heavily with the artists and changing the kits and iterating on them now And that's okay, because like I said before, we have a little bit more time now to spend on this sort of thing, and it only behooves us to do it rather than getting in a scramble later on. Also, incidental writing, the little notes and books that you find in our games, give our games a lot of personality. But when you get busy later, that's the first thing that you just decide not to do. But after you've done your concept pass, your pass 0, you've probably talked to people and we have agreement that your concept works. So now if you want to write some books about those feuding brothers and their hovercraft oil company, that's cool, go ahead. Like, do it now. This can happen anytime, but we have a little more time to breathe and think about it at this moment, so no harm done. There's also a little bit of housekeeping we can do. We set up connectivity, different map data. We know which region this is in, what are the cells named, or is there a map marker here. This is just housekeeping stuff, but it's not likely to change very much, so we can do it now, spare ourselves a headache later. So pass 1, we avoid doing any kind of optimization. Our optimization is intrinsically tied to the layout of the space. Now, the thing to remember with each of these passes is you're not going to get it right. You're going to do your first pass, and you're going to finish the task and sort of move on to other stuff. And meanwhile, other people will play it and give you feedback, and that feedback will often result in changes. So if you do your optimization now, and then you get some major layout changes to do in a future pass, you're going to have to throw out all that extra work, so don't spend the time. Likewise, we don't do any encounters or nav mesh, which is our AI pathing solution. It's tempting maybe because we might have like the first character running around trying to kill you with a club, but that stuff is super rough right now. And again, if your layout changes, all that work has to be thrown out. Don't do it. Resist the temptation. Lighting and cluttering, again, common temptation. Don't do it. Also, don't do any kit bashing. Don't do any art hacks. For the uninitiated, kit bashing, often associated with the idea of the Star Wars model builders would go out and buy all the like Revell model kits and break them up and use the pieces to create new stuff. And we do this a lot. I stumbled across this in Reddit a few months back. And somebody's playing through Skyrim and they notice all these little end tables. If you've played Skyrim, you might recognize them. But haha, they are not end tables, they are shelves. We just pushed them down. Fools. This stuff's good. It lets us stretch art that we have, get the most out of it. But we don't want to do this too early, because this masks need. This hides problems. If you feel the need to take a wall, turn it sideways, and create a bridge or a door or something, you are gaining a short-term solution for something that should be fixed the capital R right way. Later on, sure, different story. But we'll do these kit bashes and art hacks when we know there is not a real solution coming online. Doing it now wastes your time, and it also diminishes your ability to express, I have a need that needs to be resolved. So more time goes on, and we get to pass 2. And pass 2 is about gameplay. So at this stage in the project, we've been working on a vertical slice, all of our core mechanics are in, and if you played the game in the right kinds of locations, against the right kind of enemies, with the right kind of equipment, it almost looks like a thing that will be done one day, which means that now we can start going to places that use similar enemies and locations and such, and doing our first or second passes to get some rough gameplay in. And as we do these, more locations and more enemies will come online. And they always come online faster after a vertical slice. So we can kind of organically scale ourselves with the project here. So as you might expect, second pass, we want to get enemies spawning, set them up on patrols, how many, where are they? The player should have a sense of where do I find healing items and loot? Where do I find a hidden cache which I can lockpick open? Where is the big, boss chest, bonanza loot at the end? It's also a good time to do any scenes. These are part of your gameplay too. So if you want to be able to eavesdrop on a couple of guards, you can sketch that dialogue in now. If you want a character to run past a certain hallway as a player approaches, you can stub that sort of scene in now. Also, this is the time to do our nav mesh support. Obviously you have to, otherwise your encounters won't actually work, but we also know that our layout's going to stick at this point. So we can do this work with a strong confidence that it's a foundation we will be polishing as we go on. And like I said, between pass 1 and pass 2 and every other pass, you're going to get feedback. So sometimes at the beginning of the second pass, you'll have revisions. We want to flip a layout, or you have too much symmetry and want to change that up. We'll just do that stuff now as part of the pass. You just roll it into the beginning of the pass, and then you just go on your merry way and start getting the encounters and stuff in. Also, it's good to occasionally remind ourselves our games are not always entirely about pushing pointy sticks into people. We have other things going on. So if you want to write a conversation with an NPC, or if you want to have a scripted puzzle the player will solve, get that stuff in now, because it is part of the pacing, and pacing is what we want to get a sense of now. But it's okay if it doesn't work super well, and if the player, does this puzzle in not just the right way, it falls apart, because we're just sketching. We just want to prove our ideas and get them on screen. Also, now's the time when we'll do our early optimization, in contrast to first pass. But even then, you might wonder why we would do this now. The spaces are still unlit. They're still uncluttered. The art's not finished. We're not struggling with frame rate. And even if we are, it's probably not our fault. It's probably programming's fault because they're working on the rendering and it's not optimized and blah, blah, blah. So why do it? And it comes down to just eating your vegetables. There's no reason not to do it now. And it's tedious work that is procedural. If we do it now, when we have less to work on in terms of expressing final gameplay, we won't have to spend the time later when we do have the tools to do that. So have your veggies now, we get to have our dessert after. Stuff we avoid doing at pass 2. Numero uno. Don't blow it up, please. Everyone wants to do this. It's such a common temptation. When you come back to something that you worked on, maybe it was one of your first things, there's new art online, your old ideas, they're crap, and you can do better stuff. And also, sometimes it's more fun to make something from scratch, again, the drug that hooked us, as opposed to taking something that exists and has maybe problems and baggage and carrying that forward. And this is a temptation that we have succumbed to time and time and time again. And what we've learned is when you do it, you often end up with something that's different, but it's not actually demonstrably better, right? So you've now thrown away work, gone back and done your 0 and 1 pass over and done your second pass, and you just end up at a different fork in the road. This is not iteration. This is boredom. There's a fine line to draw, because sometimes it's tempting to say, I'm going to iterate, I'm going to make things better. Iteration is such a positive thing. But when you're just scrapping stuff to no real effect, you're not iterating, you're just maybe wasting your time. And it's worth letting these things stick around to see if they're going to deliver on potential that they haven't had the opportunity to just yet. Also, we don't really want to go in-depth with our scripting or handling. It's okay if your enemies are kind of weird and stodgy, or if your scripting falls apart, or you don't have all your different dialogue branches in. Because again, we're just sketching at this point. We haven't gotten any feedback yet, and we just want something that sort of demonstrates our intent, but doesn't necessarily carry it fully out. Now, from this point on, we start getting a lot more feedback. It's going to kind of ramp up throughout the entire project, and we're going to get more and more and more. And there are many avenues through which it comes. We'll get these sort of around the studio anecdotal stuff. Hey, you come here, play this, give me some notes. Or, hey, an email comes in and a programmer was testing a feature and just happened to do it in your level and they have some thoughts about why you're an idiot and should be fired, right? We have group critiques, which are kind of an art school format where we go in a big screen room and we just start playing content, and artists and designers just start shouting out thoughts and opinions. We have more formal peer reviews where we play the content and come with notes and we talk about it and we have feelings. Also, your lead level designer and any artists that worked on pieces in the particular space will play sort of in a more formal way and give you notes about things that might need to be revised. So what do you do with this feedback? Nothing. Not yet. What we want to do with feedback is we want to compile it, right? We want to keep lists. Because what you find is it's hard to say no to a good idea. When somebody comes to you with a suggestion, you want to do it. You agree 100%. You had sort of a suspicion. But a lot of times, if we wait, we'll find that, you know what, nobody else had that same observation. Maybe it's not as big a deal as we thought. And this other thing, which seemed fine, like everyone hated, and we need to solve. So by kind of holding your horses and just putting the feedback together, we can make more calculated decisions about how we spend our time just when we get to the next pass. Speaking of which, time goes on. Pass 3 arrives. Pass 3 is about getting content complete. Now at this stage, we're past the vertical slice. So most of the core of the game is here. We have our main enemy types. We have our core weapons, mechanics, and all this stuff to work with. So we can make gameplay. Cool. It's also that first point for anybody who's worked on a project that has sort of date stretching in the future where, coming through the mist, you can see alpha and beta is not far behind, and that's terrifying, right? But this is good. It tells us roughly where we are and where we need to get going. So as a level designer then, your main objective on third pass is to make sure nothing in your level remains which is missing, placeholder, temporary, art hack, kit bashed, or otherwise unaccounted for. This doesn't necessarily mean that at the end of your third pass there's actually all that stuff is in. You'll have things beyond your control, a piece of art which hasn't been made yet, or a code feature which hasn't been implemented. But that's okay. What we do with that is we stop assuming it'll happen. We actually get up and we go to somebody and say, hey, I need this piece of art. I'm relying on it to do this thing. Who's going to make it and roughly when? So I know I have time to put it in. And, a producer will say, oh, well, it's so-and-so, and it's on the schedule, and everything's good. Carry on. Sometimes they say, I've never heard of that, and you're a crazy person, or we cut that, and nobody bothered to tell you. And it's much better to find that out now, because as part of the third pass, we can make plans, right? Okay, what are we doing instead? If we don't find that out until we actually expected to get the content later, we're screwed. And we're scrambling to figure it out, and we're making decisions in the moment, which maybe aren't the most calculated decisions. So do your homework now, get that due diligence out of the way, and make sure you're not going to get surprised later. Now, this admittedly is mostly a bookkeeping thing. It doesn't take the majority of the time you spend on a third pass. So the rest of the time, you're going to just detail out the gameplay and refine it. Those characters, which were just sort of standing around in a level, well, now you can kind of get them patrolling and using furniture and some stuff to interact with, and just get a better sense of the gameplay and pacing and sort of take baby steps towards that. This is also a good time generally to make sure that the content reality of the game matches with the systems design goals of the game. So, for example, we might, at the beginning of a game, have a bunch of cool ideas for different systemic content, like, the player can, use these benches and do surgery on themselves to, improve their health. And it turned out that sucked, and nobody liked it, and we cut it. But we did this other thing where the players can make potions, and that's actually really fun to do in the middle of a combat dungeon. So we want to get more of that in, or there aren't enough opportunities to lockpick and level up that skill. By sort of raising our hands and saying, hey, what do we actually expect? What systems goals do we have that have actually stuck? We can organically work this stuff in as we're working on the gameplay pass, rather than having to retroactively shove it in later when we realize, oh, the player never gets to actually use their lockpick skill. Something else that we do at this pass is we pair you up. So if you're a level designer, you'll have another level designer who is explicitly there to help. This person might only dedicate an hour of their time total to you, but it's useful to have that soundboard, because it's very easy to put your head down and do the work and check it in and move on to the next thing. But by having somebody there to gut check, what's your opinion here? Play this thing. How would you solve this technical problem? It prevents you from spinning your wheels and, again, making poor decisions and then building upon them. You can just check with somebody on a daily basis to be sure you're on the right path. It's worth noting, by the way, that third passes are different from each other. Pass 0, 1, 2, they're all very focused. We're talking about concept, we're talking about layout, we're talking about the gameplay. But third pass could be this week you have a difficult scripting problem. You're trying to do that bell puzzle again, and you need to make sure the scripting works. So you spend most of your time there. But next week you have a space that ended up having big layout issues that we didn't really solve the way we wanted to, and you have to spend a bunch of your third pass reworking some layout stuff. Now, another thing just kind of about our style as a studio, at least me personally, I don't like to be micromanaged, and I don't like to micromanage people either. It's boring. So this just comes down to you as a level designer knowing how to spend your time effectively. Just self-manage your time. You look at the work that needs to be done. I know that on this one, I'm going to have to spend 3 days just scripting, and the one that comes after, I might not have to do any scripting, and that's okay as long as you're just sort of compartmentalizing and doing things within the time that makes sense. So stuff that we avoid. We don't want to do any detailed optimization. Now, I made a big deal about doing optimization on second pass, but not enough has changed now. Assuming you got that work done, we haven't probably made big changes to the layout, and we still don't have lighting or clutter in the space. So there's no point. Save yourself the time. Also, we're no longer okay neglecting the golden path. So that scripted puzzle that kind of broke if you didn't play it just the right way, now you need to sort of gold plate it and tuck in all the corners, because you've gotten your feedback, you know that gameplay works, and we're going to try and get that thing shippable. So start. All right, so I fibbed. We don't really call third pass content complete. I made that up. It's a talk. It communicates better. I call it ship with shame. Now here's why. If you put a gun to my head, a third pass level technically has everything there. The player can play it. It shouldn't break. I guess I could ship it, but I would not be proud of it. And there's an important distinction to make here, because something that's done isn't the same as something that's good. This is a problem a lot of schedules get into. They schedule to done. We need to schedule to good. So third pass isn't about necessarily making a level high quality. I mean, hopefully we can see that it's going to be high quality. But more important to that is establishing confidence. Confidence that this thing is going to get done. We're going to have the art. We're going to have the code. We've proven our ideas and we can play them. And we know that it's got the potential to be better than it is now. Because from here on out, we want to be in opportunity time. That's where we want to get. However, this is also a good time to make the admission that something's not quite coming together. A level which has struggled along through pass 1, pass 2, and pass 3, those problems are probably real. This is the time to look at the feedback and say, what's the plan? Now, as I've intimated, we don't like to blow things up for the sake of itself. It's just a knee-jerk reaction and boredom many times. So we'll often try and deflect the blow. Can we tweak things or change an idea or kind of maybe break this level up and take the good bits and put them in other levels? Maybe ambition is a problem. And if we just narrow the focus down and we take a thing which is sort of a big, concept piece and just make it more focused, can we actually get there and get there faster? We have something that we call the mulligan pass, which is effectively a do-over. We hide time in the schedule. Producers who lie to you are the producers you want, right? So these producers will sort of tuck away little bits of time, and then if you say, like, I had a bad week, I had bad ideas, I was sick, whatever, like, okay, just do it again. Like, just scratch it and do another pass. And we have some time built into the schedule so that we can just try that if it's just a result of an off day. Sometimes we need to cut. Now, I haven't had many conversations where, hey, we should cut this, that went super awesome well and everybody was happy, right? We love our babies and we don't want to kill them, but cuts can be so liberating. Think of it this way. If you have something which is poor, you're going to spend a bunch of your time and your attention working it up to mediocre, maybe good. Wouldn't you rather just cut your losses and walk away from it, and then spend that same time and attention on something that's good and make it awesome, right? There's a economy of your time and attention that we need to pay attention to, so just make a cut sometimes and don't worry about delivering on the potential of something that was a cool idea but didn't really work. Also, we have strike teams. Strike teams, they're like pods or cabals. It's a multidisciplinary group of developers who center around a particular content, a piece of content or a feature, and we use them in a few different ways. So say something that hasn't really been worked on very much yet, maybe a certain type of spell casting. We'll put a strike team on it and we'll just sort of push that thing down the field and get it, oh cool, it didn't exist a month ago and now we have something playable. Also, we'll use it for things which show a lot of potential and have lots of promise, or things that are very visible in the core parts of the game, and we'll put a strike team on it and we'll lift it up and make it really, really, really good by getting this group focused on it and only it for a while. But we can also use strike teams to gather around a level designer who's struggling and help them get to the finish line. Because sometimes it's not really an idea that worked with just a level designer, and you need a programmer on board, you need an effects artist on board, you need an extra environment love, and things that have this potential but are just weighing the level designer down, a strike team is often the best solution for. However, sometimes none of these solutions work. Sometimes the answer is time. You guys remember when I said I hate crunch? Why would I ever come to GDC and put crunch on a screen and tell you that's a way to solve a problem? Right? I'm pissing myself off. The reason why becomes clear if you put yourself in the position of a level designer who's working on something which isn't coming together. And we have a conversation, maybe we need to cut this or rework it, and you're like, no, this is the right idea. I just need to put a little extra time in. I can make this work. Now, if I'm your lead, and I know that you're working 5, 6, 7 days a week till 10 o'clock at night or worse, I cannot believe you. Where are those hours going to come from? You gonna not sleep? You're gonna sleep here? I know that you're gonna get to a point of diminishing returns. You're not gonna make your best decisions. You're not only gonna be less productive crunching, you're gonna hurt the game. You're gonna introduce bugs and problems you didn't have before. No, don't crunch. We're cutting it. However, if you're a level designer who is going home at 5 and 6 o'clock and you're having a happy, healthy life, and you go home on the weekend and you say, this idea just needs time. I promise. I'm going to put in some extra time. I'll put in a few nights. I can make it work. Okay, that's your choice. If you want to do it as a short-term solution, okay. But the thing about crunch is it's a blunt instrument. nobody who puts in hours impresses me. It's the least intelligent thing to do. Anybody can work hours. Screw that. Like, I want you to work smart and do things effectively, intelligently. And then when you're really backed up against a wall and all you can do is crunch, if you got some in the tank, go for it. But if you're already all the way down on that and you're crunching like crazy, you don't have that option. That tool is not in your tool belt. The least useful tool isn't even available to you. No way. We have to cut the content. Okay, on to happier times. Next up comes something which is a little different. We get a beauty pass. And the thing about the beauty pass, it just kind of happens when it happens, right? It's not really part of our core workflow. And the reason is that at this point, the project is shifting. We're taking a pivot towards completion. And one of the things that happens at this time is that artists have to stop shoveling so much crap in the game, right? They need to start polishing their content, optimizing their art, and also code needs a more consistent baseline so that if the game starts crashing on Tuesday morning, programming knows it's probably because of an optimization they made on Monday and not because 30 gigs of new content went into that area overnight. This frees the artists up to help us with things like lighting our spaces, putting in the detail clutter, getting atmospheric effects in. Our sound engineers help out and they'll do ambient audio passes through the levels. And this is great because these people are just going to do a better job. Level designers can do all this work, and in certain studios they will. But an artist who just has this frame of mind will do it better than I will, and they'll do it faster. And if you're paying attention to like that sliding scale, we are getting to the point now where level designer needs to spend his or her time and attention elsewhere. So why not let the artists help out? They have more bandwidth now. It just makes sense. So we're mostly hands-off, but you're not totally absentee. You need to make sure you're there to communicate your particular ideas, needs, intents, problems with the space. Don't ever think of the artists working in your space as janitors. These people are not here to come in and clean up your mess. Collaborate with these people, communicate with them, talk to them. Really, the only thing you need to not do on this path is just don't disengage, don't check out, be there. You can't take a blind shot and hope you're going to get good results from it, right? It's not going to work. Anybody who was in the talk with Nate last year, we used this slide, which was to communicate how a lot of studios have this wall between art and design where sort of throw content over and hope you get good results back, and surprise, usually you don't, and it can get actually really toxic and hostile. And then the work has to be redone, and people are angry at each other. And like, the solution is so simple. Just don't be a jerk. Like, talk to each other, communicate, say what you would like to be done, listen to what they have to say. You'll get better results. You'll get them faster, and everybody will be happier. Why wouldn't you do this? So onward to the final pass. Now, final pass is all about polish, and it should be. Because at this point, the game is closing in on being done. We're basically feature complete. We're coming up on the point where we have to start not putting stuff in, not keep changing stuff, or we have to lock it down and go to like showstoppers only. So this is the golden hour. This is the time to make stuff really, really good. Because afterwards, it goes in a box, it goes on a shelf, and that's it. You don't get another chance. So capitalize. This is your moment as a level designer to do what you came to do. So, as you'd expect, we polish, right? You look for those opportunities. You identify them, you bring them up, you improve them. This pass is all about accentuate the positive and just de-emphasize or eliminate the negative. Do what you can. A lot of this will be just listening to the feedback that you've heard throughout the project and saying, these are the things I'm going to do. This is what goes into the polish pass. These are the right ideas. But also, there are things we just couldn't have known before. It turns out we added a grenade launcher in the middle of the project, and grenade launchers are really fun to use at a car lot, and we never actually combined those elements. Easy pickings, son. You just go and put a grenade launcher in your car lot. Done. We've made better gameplay, and we've presented the player with opportunities to see the game at its best. That's your job as a level designer. You are the showcaser. You put everybody else's work on a pedestal and make the programmers and the artists look good. That's your job. There's other stuff that we'll do. We'll go through and we'll incorporate our final assets. We make sure that's actually going to run on the platforms we want it to run on. We finalize our nav mesh. We do our optimization. This is all cakewalk stuff, procedural, just needs to get done so that you have something professional and polished. One more fib. if you're paying attention, I didn't actually call it fourth pass because it's not always actually the final pass on fourth. So what happens is we finish something, we get through the content complete, we do a polish pass, and of course we play test. Sometimes, yeah, everything's great, can't be much better, move on. Fourth pass is final pass. But many, many times we say, well, if these things could be better, these things maybe, are bad, so we'll do another polish pass. Let's go again, let's do it. We'll get a fifth pass in on it. And we schedule ourselves so that we can do this as long as we're sort of cutting things off at points that make sense. So a space might only get 4 passes, but it might get 5, 6, 7, or 8. Now here's the thing. Everything below the line where it says polish, that's your structural iteration. Again, these are the steps that have to happen for a level to exist. This is about getting it done. Everything above the line is about making it good. This is the cycle. This is where we loop through the content, we play, we test, we learn, and then we apply it. And we do it again, and we do it again until it's the best it can be. That's what Opportunity Time is all about. That's what our schedule is trying to accomplish. So I'm going to leave you all today with some thoughts on perspective, because that's kind of the underlying theme of this talk. Because it's really easy to lose sight of the big picture as a level designer. You're in the weeds, you're in the trenches, you're making the moment-to-moment content. You are the person on the couch with the player, right? And when you're that close to the content, you can lose sight of the fact that the time you're spending polishing this one thing to perfection actually comes at a cost to the other 15 levels that you have to build. And you want to make sure to spread that love, to make sure everything is at a consistent bar of quality. It's worth remembering that there's no such thing as a game that's done. You go into any shop, pull any game off the shelf, and start calling people in the credits. There's not going to be a developer on there that couldn't have done one more thing. One more month, one more hour, I could have made something better. We all are tortured by those demons. But you have to remember that there's only so much time we can give games. And you have to make the most of the time that you have. When you work on games that take 3 years, 4 years, a lot of us have probably already done the math. I only have so many shots at this, right? I mean, it's just biology. I want to make games. I don't want to just make game, right? The one in front of me isn't going to be the last thing I do. I'm going to do one after that and one after that. And when I'm old and gray, I want to still be making games. This is what I love. So by being smart about process, by being healthy in the way that we conduct ourselves and that we work, we can get there, right? We can make it not about just the thing we're doing now, but we can pour our passion into all of our projects. Because I want to make great things, but I want to do it for a long time. And I want you to make great things, and I want to play your great things for a long time. And I don't want us all to burn out and check out and punch out and be done. And I really, really think that being critical about your process organically and learning and improving, iterating on you, is how you get there. Thank you very much.
That was awesome.